Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, visitors in the Public Tribune, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this meeting of the Committee of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure number 3 for today, Tuesday, May 28, 2024. I also welcome the representatives of the St. Maarten Nature Foundation. We've established a quorum of 7 members. Please stand for a moment of silence. I've received notice of absence from the following members: MP Egbert Duran. Are there any notifications from the members of Parliament gathered right now? I see no need. The agenda point for this meeting is presentation by the Nature Foundation of St. Maarten regarding the ongoing Marine Park Legislation Project, IS 428, 2023-2024, dated February 23rd, 2024. We go over to the agenda point. On February 23rd, 2024, Parliament received correspondence from the Nature Foundation of St. Maarten with a request for an audience with regard to the aforementioned agenda point. The Foundation informed that it would be introducing its ongoing Marine Park Legislation Project, which is a joint environmental effort supported by the Blue Marine Foundation, the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, and De Jong Legal. Hence, this meeting today. At this time, I would first like to give the floor to Ms. Leslie Hickerson, Foundation Manager of Nature Foundation St. Maarten, for some introductory remarks, and a presentation. Ms. Hickerson, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this audience with the honorable members of Parliament. My name is Leslie Hickerson. I'm the manager of the Nature Foundation. I have had the pleasure of working with several of you on group projects or individual cleanups, different activities that we have done over the years. But this specific request has come, as stated, for a project called the Marine Park Legislation Project. This project is funded by the Blue Marine entity out of the United Kingdom and the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance. And before we get into all of the details of everything, I am going to give a little bit of history on the Nature Foundation St. Maarten for those of you that might not be as familiar with us. The things that we'll be discussing today are not only the background of the Nature Foundation and the project itself, but also our current nature legislation, the needs that St. Maarten has regarding marine protections, our local marine ecosystems and the health status of those areas, marine area protections that can be proposed, marine species protections that can be proposed, and our responsibility as a community to protect our island. For those of you that don't know, the Nature Foundation is a non-government, non-profit organization established in 1997 here in St. Maarten. Our mission is to preserve and enhance the natural environment of St. Maarten through proper management, education, public awareness, law enforcement, scientific research, and monitoring relating to all aspects of the terrestrial, wetland, and marine ecosystems. Currently, we operate through a service level agreement with Government St. Maarten, which is managed by the Ministry of ROMI. That service level agreement is something that is renewed every 3 years right now and is actually coming due again in January of 2025. With that, we have certain deliverables that have been outlined by the Ministry of ROMI as they are financially contributing to the service level agreement, and those priorities are as such. We have 40% of our time managed on invasive species, 20% on research and advice, 13% on site inspections and enforcements, 13% on active park management, 7% on public outreach, and 7% on the protection of endangered species. Throughout the years, the service level agreement has remained very standard. Currently, the Nature Foundation receives 204,000 guilders each year for our activities in the service level agreement, and then an additional 100,000 guilders specifically earmarked for the invasive species management project, both from the Ministry of ROMI. The protected areas that currently stand in St. Maarten is, unfortunately, we are the only Dutch Caribbean island without a terrestrial protected area. This is a huge loss for St. Maarten as it leaves a lot of our terrestrial species at risk. We do, however, have the Man of War Shoal Marine Protected Area, which is a SPA protected area, and that is 31 square kilometers. We also have a Ramsar site in Mullet Pond, and St. Maarten is part of the Ramsar Convention, is party to the Ramsar Convention, though the Mullet Pond is still under severe pressure for development. So our current international and local obligations. Now, please remember, this project is funded by some place called Blue Marine. So I have focused very specifically on our marine legislations. That is not to lead anyone astray into thinking that the terrestrial area and the terrestrial legislation is in good standing. It's only focused on Blue Marine because that's where the funding is coming from, okay? So I do mention both the beach and hillside policies. These are very relevant today. There is a lot of public outcry regarding both of these policies and whether or not they're being adhered to, and whether or not they should be adapted into ordinances rather than policies. Just for some information, the hillside policy actually says that the main objective of the policy is to conserve the green hillsides, protect, and if needed, restore their natural value for the benefit of the environment, the tourism industry, and the quality of life on St. Martin. Furthermore, by regulating development in the hillsides in a proper manner by setting building guidelines, the island government wishes to limit erosion and uncontrolled rain and wastewater runoff, which affects the ecosystems of the whole island from the hills down to the lower and coastal areas. This is a really significant thing that has been in the hillside policy for decades, and we know that the impacts of unregulated development are severely happening on the island. We also have the Management and Protection of Nature Ordinance, which I think Gerald will go a little bit further into later, but this is a local ordinance that allows for extremely limited protection of both species and areas on the island. The Ramsar Convention, which we are party to, is a conservation of wetlands convention that we only have one current location, that is Mullet Pond. Aruba just announced 7 new Ramsar locations this year, and we are hoping that St. Martin follows suit to protect the wetland ecosystems that are left on the island. As we know, we have lost ponds to development over the years, and those are an integral part of our environment. The Ramsar Convention states specifically that an area cannot be used for anything that is ecologically negative to the environment. So it still can be used, for example, for kayak trips or snorkeling trips, things like that. But we unfortunately get a lot of pressure for that to be completely developed, filled in, used for jet skiing, things like that. And finally, the SPA protocol. St. Martin is a member of the SPA protocol through the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which offers protections to species on SPA lists 1 and 2, as well as the SPA protected area of Man o' War Shoal. The importance of a healthy marine environment. I'm sure everyone in this room knows the several reasons that it is very important for an island like St. Martin to have a healthy marine environment. But just as an overview, of course, we need to have a healthy marine environment for its role in tourism. We rely extremely heavily on the tourism industry for the economic success of our residents. Not providing a healthy marine environment and risking things like beach closures due to wastewater pollution, erosion, loss of hotel areas or recreation areas due to rising water, due to climate change, are all things that should be considered in the major planning of the island by those of you in this room. Climate change, which I already mentioned, climate change mitigation starts with nature-based solutions. So the flooding that we're experiencing, the impacts of erosion on our hillsides, and of course, the reality is it's not if another hurricane will come through and damage St. Martin, it is when that will happen. Are we prepared? Is our ecosystem prepared? And can it rebound from that damage? We also always want to include the support of fisheries. The fisheries industry on St. Martin is extremely small, and that is due to unsustainable practices in the past and the poor reef health that we have in the coastline right now. It is a true loss because the fisheries industry shares a deep connection through culture and heritage that is being lost. I don't know a single fisherman on the Dutch side right now that can make their living only doing fisheries. They all have to have supplemental income, and most of this is stepping away from earning from and living on the sea. That's a loss to the culture, a loss to the heritage of St. Martin, and supporting fisheries so that we can grow that industry is extremely important. And finally, I mentioned the standard of living. The standard of living for St. Maarten residents does start with a healthy marine and terrestrial ecosystem. There are several residents on this island that cannot afford to travel away if there's a hurricane. They cannot afford to go on long vacations each summer with their families. If we cannot provide a healthy marine and terrestrial ecosystem for them to live in, to grow, and to enjoy, we are doing a disservice to the people that elected you here. So now we'll move on to the state of our marine ecosystems. I do have to say that this is going to be kind of a negative section of this presentation. I don't think that we can go so far as assuming that it'll be a reality check for everyone. I think everyone knows in general what the situation is for our coastlines and our coral reefs. But due to unsustainable development management practices, the consequences of climate change, and limited legal protections, St. Maarten's marine and terrestrial ecosystems are under extreme threat. We have been very lucky to be partnered with the Ministry of ROMI through the Resembid project and been able to execute Project Carina, which is a coastal resilience needs assessment. This was desperately needed for St. Maarten, and we are very much hoping that soon we will be able to execute the other contracts that are waiting within the ministry to combine this with a socioeconomic study, a risk and vulnerability assessment, so that we have the data from the natural environment and the data from the people living on the land, so that we can provide the Ministry of ROMI with a true path and a plan and a way towards sustainable development, something that they need to be able to make the decisions that are being asked of them. One of the first steps in this was assessing the health of our coral reefs. We used a reef health status indicator that's used throughout the Dutch Caribbean, and you can see on the slide here that on our reef health status, there's critical, poor, fair, good, and very good. So blue being very good, red being critical if you can't read from that far. The circle shows that we're covering live coral, macroalgae cover, commercial fish biomass or abundance, and herbivorous fish abundance. Based on this here, just as a quick scan, you can make no mistake, the St. Maarten's coral reefs, which support the blue waters and white sand beaches our tourists do come here to visit, are dying, and action must be taken. The area that shows the cluster of 4 marks together that have 2 that have the very good commercial fish biomass, that is actually within the protected area of Man o' War Shoal, that's the spa protected area. So that aligns with protections being there. Long Bay Reef on the far left is an area that traditional fishermen should be able to visit, and there's no commercial fishing mass there, there's no herbivorous fish biomass there, and those are both indicators of how well the reef is doing. Additionally, through the Project Carina, we were able to do a proper underwater habitat map. So using a drop camera, which is a camera on a long line, we had the project team and our volunteers go out and mark 1,500 different spots, both in the lagoon and in the coastal areas of St. Maarten. The map here on the right shows the habitat categories. There's bare sand, seagrass, macroalgae fields, sargassum fields, patch reef, coral reef, and Gorgonian reef. One of the things that's the most interesting about the data analysis that our science officer has done on this is that most of these really important areas are not within the protected zone. So 87.5% of the reef habitats are actually located outside of Man o' War Shoal. The Gorgonian reef, 69.7% of that is located outside of protected areas as well. And 88% of the seagrass beds are located outside of protected areas. Another statement that needs to be made regarding this habitat map and what's happening to the coral reefs is the coral bleaching alert. I would assume a lot of you know what coral bleaching is, but just to be safe, I'll cover it. As water temperatures rise, the coral will eject the algal cells that are living kind of in their skin. And that happens when they're under stress or they're simply too hot. Now, a coral can survive and come back from coral bleaching, but it's very unlikely. It puts them at risk for other diseases like stony coral tissue loss disease, which does exist in St. Maarten. It puts them under risk for if there's a hurricane, it won't be as healthy to grow back. And the coral bleaching has spread throughout the entire world. It's not only St. Maarten that is experiencing it, but specifically for us, from August to November of 2023, coral bleaching increased by 230% in compared to the last 20 years. And NOAA has predicted that this year will be similar or worse to last year. So we can expect another loss of coral species, even in the protected areas. Next are wetland and other species. Loss of mangroves. The Nature Foundation has been going on for quite some time about how 60% of St. Maarten's mangroves have been lost due to development. Of the remaining 40% that exist, 80% of them were damaged during Hurricane Irma. And there are some severe knowledge gaps when it comes to mangroves. There is a lack of awareness regarding the origin and the ecosystem services provided by mangroves, and that has led to little interest in protecting them, even within government. Seagrasses provide some of the highest levels of climate change mitigation impacts and also have zero level of protection within St. Maarten. So both mangroves and seagrasses playing critical roles for climate change and for the protection of our citizens with zero protection. And the health of grazer species. One of the major problems that happens in St. Maarten is through wastewater pollution. The nutrient levels of our immediate coastline are extremely high. It's like when you fertilize a garden. If everyone's septic tank is overflowing, if people have the emergency system to be that when their wastewater system breaks down, it pumps directly into the lagoon, there's an excess of nutrients and nitrogen. That means that algae blooms, and there have been major events of algae blooms in the lagoon that everyone probably remembers. But when algae blooms, it outcompetes coral reef, and it outcompetes native seagrass. So it's actually smothering the coral. So to combat that, having a nature-based solution of protecting grazer species that naturally eat those algae, like parrotfish or diadema, can help an ecosystem even when it's polluted. And then, of course, we have the human threats to St. Maarten's marine life. All of these photos, unfortunately, were taken in St. Maarten, and the human impact is severe. The fishing line is being removed from the spa protected area of Man of War Shoal. There were several hundred feet of fishing line that was dumped there with cinder blocks. The sea turtle was found nearby Great Bay after that chair had flown out into the water, probably during a storm, and the sea turtle drowned while trying to swim through. The conch, I'll go in specifically about the fishing of conch and show you why these are not actually sustainably fished. And then, of course, the coastal developments and impacts. So, by safeguarding the marine environment, we honor St. Maarten's heritage and ensure future generations can inherit the natural beauty and resources that define our island. So therefore, I have tentatively suggested some areas for increased protections based on our data collection that I want to introduce to you now so that when they come through later, you have a thorough understanding of why they're being introduced. Biologically important areas in our lagoon and coastline. Number one, for the Man of War Shoal, which is currently a spa protected area and has been introduced as a ministerial decree by my predecessors at the Nature Foundation, should be changed to an ordinance, a full-fledged ordinance that has its own legislation and is no longer at risk, and to be honest with you, closes the gaps that currently exist within that protection. The eastern coastline, you can see a limited use zone pictured here. The area under the management of the Nature Foundation would allow for traditional fishing because we do have some advocates within the fishing community that on the rare occasion use that area. But it would monitor anchoring, use of chemicals, and mooring installation. I do want to make it clear that the traditional fishermen that are left on the Dutch side of the island are not the ones that are causing the most severe impacts to the health and to the marine ecosystem. So working with them is essential when developing this and enforcing it. Kupakoi is also on the far left there. A limited use zone could support a shark nursery area and protect coral reef currently at risk from anchorage and overuse. That's the same kind of Long Bay area that other fishermen do need to visit as well. And finally, Little Key within the lagoon, Little Key Island. For over a year, VROMI's policy department has been working towards protecting Little Key Island, whose mangrove nursery and surrounding native seagrass beds are very biologically valuable. just to show you that we did follow the data here. This isn't something that we just picked and chose areas that we thought would be easy to protect, easy to manage. We really selected these areas based on what the habitat map showed us with Project Carina. Suggested species protections. I have several here. I actually only zoomed in to 2 of them, which is parrotfish, number 1, and mangroves, number 5, on following slides. So for the rest, I'll just do a short overview with you. Diadema or long-spine sea urchins, I think, should be given full protections in St. Martin, and as they are essential to reducing algae growth, and they have gone through mass die-offs, both in 2022 and in the 1970s. These species are under threat. We're actually doing research with Saba Conservation Foundation and their partners to see what their level of recovery is in St. Martin. Queen conch needs updated legislation to ensure that conch can reproduce before harvesting. Currently, we do have queen conch legislation, but it's focused on the size of the shell, and that doesn't actually tell you whether that conch is sexually mature and has reproduced or not. Anytime we introduce a fishing restriction that is based on size, the reason we're introducing that is to ensure that that species got big enough and old enough to have babies, to reproduce, so that it can be replaced. We don't want to just stop people from taking everything out unless that's the worst case scenario. We have such bad data that we have to do something like that. We just want to make sure that the fishermen that are harvesting it now, their grandchildren will also be able to, right? So for the queen conch, that would mean addressing the legislation so that it would be focused on the lip size of the conch and not just the shell size. For the Caribbean spiny lobster, the update that needs to happen there is we need to include that egg-bearing females cannot be removed as well. There is currently a size restriction that follows international standards, and that's quite good for us. But egg-bearing females should be left behind, firstly so the eggs that they're bearing can hatch, but also because they're obviously a valuable reproduction species. Mangroves I will go over in the next slide, and then seasonal closures. Seasonal closures we included as an option for the Management and Scientific Authority, which right now is the Nature Foundation, to restrict fishing activity via seasonal closures for population recovery of species that are present on the CITES 1 and 2 annexes and the IUCN Red List for endangered or critically endangered. So I would love to say that we could produce closures for any species that's at risk, but we picked extremely limited lists here so that that could be managed properly. And there would be a reason that is internationally stated for protecting that species. So specifically on parrotfish, I spoke about grazers. Just like the diadema and conch, parrotfish act as a grazer species. Seasonal restrictions and size restrictions are needed to boost reproduction of parrotfish. Other Caribbean islands, including almost all the ABC islands, are currently introducing a full fishing ban to parrotfish. They're very ecologically important. As I said before, they really combat the algae production, but also they contribute very highly to the white sand beaches. The impact on St. Martin, we need to support the creation of St. Martin's white sand beaches and the algae protection on the coastlines. Suggested measures again include the size limits, but those will be specific based on the species. There's 3 different species of parrotfish found in St. Martin, and all of them sexually mature at a different rate, so that would be introduced specific to the size. Next is the mangroves. For ecological importance, mangroves play a crucial role in coastline ecosystem protection by stabilizing shorelines during storms, preventing erosion, providing a habitat for an array of marine and terrestrial species. They also provide protection from storm surge and flooding, reducing the impact of hurricanes and other extreme weather events for coastal communities and infrastructure. Our suggested measure for these, because there are several different species of mangroves on St. Martin, is limited to the red and the black mangroves, neither of which, incidentally, can be found on the ponds, Great Salt Pond or Little Bay Pond. The red and black mangroves are still limited to the lagoon. These proposed legislation measures would state that any development impacting either the red or black mangrove species must present a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and plans for compensation for loss of nature. So if this is our best case scenario, if these were all to be instituted, what would we need to actually be successful in this? Because we cannot just introduce legislation and then not be able to back it up. For Nature Foundation as the management and scientific authority, we do need support from other ministries. As I mentioned early on, we have received support from the Ministry of ROMI for several years, and we have incidental project-based support from additional ministries. For example, the Ministry of TIAT contributed greatly to the management of invasive species. But the service level agreement is limited to the deliverables and the tasks set out by the Ministry of ROMI because they regularly contribute. That has meant that for several years, the public outreach percentage priority has been very low. Several of you know that I've been working for a couple of years trying to get a collaboration with the Ministry of Education to support nature and science-based education in all schools in St. Martin, full-time with the Nature Foundation. Additionally, support with maritime affairs and fisheries through TIAT and agriculture for terrestrial-based would go a very long way in bettering our collaborations and making sure that our advice, our research advice, our assessments are being used properly. The institution of a nature fee is also something that I think should be established, and the Nature Foundation would be alleviated of a lot of stress. Without terrestrial park entrance fees, like some of our sister islands, the Nature Foundation has fallen far behind, and a small nature fee from tourists entering the island, even if we leave an exception for those that are coming from Dutch Caribbean islands, which I think is quite a nice idea, would go a long way. To give you an example, for the marine park, we do charge a fee for tourists to come into the marine park. That's $3 a day or $15 a year. In 2023, the Nature Foundation raised just over $7,000 with the marine park fee. Through Aruba's public financial reports, it is stated that their conservation fee in the same time raised $1.4 million. That's mostly through terrestrial park entrance fees because there are several parks on Aruba, and that money goes a long way, but it also explains why Aruba Park has 55 staff and the Nature Foundation has a staff of 3 core and 1 government project-based, and then an additional 4 that are all project-based and not supported by government subsidy. Finally, commitment from decision makers is essentially important in this. Things like the Nature Policy Plan have come through, suggestions, beach policy, hillside policy, ministerial decrees, but without a commitment from the decision makers in this room, the Nature Foundation cannot get very far, right? An additional comparison that we have, even from parks that are maybe a little bit closer in comparison than Aruba, for example. Our sister park in Statia, Stenapa, currently has 14 full-time staff and 3 project staff on board, and they're able to do quite a bit in their community with a lot less pressures from development, oil spills, emergency response, things like that. Nobody ever has enough people and nobody ever has enough funding, but there's always an opportunity for us to do more without requiring so much of our citizens. And my last couple of slides are really a reminder that it is time to act. It's too late to leave this for the next generation. It's too late to leave this for the next members of parliament. The time is now. In fact, we're running quite close to the time of no return. So my last statement is that we stand at a critical juncture in our history, faced with the urgent need to preserve the natural beauty and biodiversity of St. Martin. The decisions that we make today will shape the world for our children and our grandchildren to inherit. Our vibrant coral reefs, lush landscapes, and diverse wildlife are not just treasures of today, but they should be the legacies that you leave. Let us commit to making the difficult but necessary choices to ensure that St. Martin remains a thriving sanctuary for all life. Together we can protect our island paradise from passing the point of no return, safeguarding it for the prosperity and the well-being of future generations. It has long been thought that To have economic success, you cannot protect nature. You have to choose one or the other. And not only is that no longer true, there's lots of opportunities for tourism, for development that's sustainable, for ecotourism that's manageable, but it's also too late. If we continue to bleed the resources of St. Martin, there will not be an economic success in any scope in the future. And it might not happen in my generation, it might not happen in the generation after mine, but it will certainly happen, and the decisions that lead to it will be pointed back to today. Thank you very much. We could give time for questions, or I can pass over to Garrick.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson, for your section of the presentation. Do we maybe ask questions to Ms. Hickerson first and then move on to the legal part? Because I assume Mr. de Jong is going to go more into the legislation that we should expect, or should we just receive the entire presentation and move on? All right, we'll do your section as well, and then we'll take questions. Mr. de Jong, you have the floor.
All right. Good afternoon, members of Parliament. It's nice to see you again, and it's nice to present here the legal part. I'll just wait for a moment until the screen starts. There it is. The Young Law Office was contracted by the Nature Foundation and by the Blue Marine Group to support with the legislation aspect of what she just presented on. For that, we kind of try to find an approach for this because there's a lot in place already, but is it in place set up proper? Are there any gaps in the legislation? How is it now being executed? And what is also the wish for Parliament? So how far do you want to go with protection, and how would the best and most efficient way be to put that in place in a legal, sustainable way? So that's something that we went through. In the presentation today, is going to be a little bit more of a boring aspect of this presentation. Sorry, it's the legislative aspect, so I can't make that more fun than it is. I think Leslie came with the fireworks, so this will just be a little bit different. But I kept it short, so there's just 7 slides. I will discuss with you the findings of the legal baseline that the Young Law Office did so far. We're going to discuss what your ideal situation would be, so that would be something that we've just seen from the nature organization already, but it would also be good to hear from Parliament's side what would be your ideal situation, and then a summary of steps and a timeline how we can come with a full legal package for this. So what would the steps be? So first, the findings for the legal baseline that we did so far. In correspondence with the Blue Marine Group, with the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, the Ministry of VROMI, and with the Nature Foundation, we went through the legislative basis that is here. So from there, we will create something called the legal baseline. What is in place at the moment for nature preservation? So at the moment, what you see, there are a couple of main ordinances. The ordinance that are there is the National Ordinance on Nature Management and Preservation, the National Ordinance on Maritime Management, and then there's an interesting National Ordinance on Administrative Enforcement. That's not an ordinance that is about nature preservation, but it's actually a general ordinance through which you can start administrative action. And we looked at specific areas that Leslie just presented on whether or not they are protected. So, for example, the Man of War Shoal Marine Park, the Mullet Pond, and the Little Key. And that's kind of interesting because when you dive into the legal documents of this, the Mullet Pond part is interesting because it has a Ramsar protection. So it's qualified as a Ramsar designated area, which is an international aspect and an international legal basis, but it does not have the local legislative framework to back that up. And similarly to the Man of War Shoal Marine Park, that's a Ramsar protected area, so the international legal basis is there. However, the local decision-making, I keep hearing that there was a minister that at some point signed the decree, but that was never put into the National Gazette. I can't find it, we can't find it. And so then the legal basis of that locally is put in question, even though it is protected via the SPA protocol already. Then we come to the legal basis of Little Key. That went to Council of Advice, I believe, last year. And the draft LB is made for that, and we're now reviewing the advice of Council of Advice and coming to a new LB. In looking at this, looking at the management agreement that is in place now with the Nature Foundation, the ideal situation would be if Parliament knows what they would like to protect, you put in place or you fill up the holes that you see in the national ordinances and in the national decrees, and then you also agree on what is needed to manage, supervise, and enforce the protection that you want. If you come to a point that you want a certain level of protection and you have a sustainable legal basis for that, the management agreement that is in place now with the Nature Foundation, I'll come to that in a little bit, it really should reflect the same things. So coming to this, other findings of the legal baseline is when you look at the management of what is thought to be protected now, because people think that the Man of War area, Mullet Pond, and Little Key will be protected. Does the Nature Foundation now have the resources to manage that? Do they have enough enforcement capacity to go there? Can the park rangers, are they actually mandated to issue a fine? Very practical. Can they collect a fine? Is there a legal basis to process this? How does supervision work? To compare it, on Seba, there's park rangers installed for protection of the marine park, and there are just specific designated park rangers for that. But that is reliant on the size of the park that you protect and on the legal mandate that you give them. Have you given your park rangers here that mandate? So that's very important to check. That was one of the findings that I saw from the contract between VROMI and the Nature Foundation now. So then that brings me to the ideal situation. There's two things: the national ordinance modernizing on the following topic. So just ensure that the legal basis is correct, creation of the nature park, appointment of areas within the relevant international regimes. So if Ramsar designates Man of War Shoal as a protected area, and locally you want to confirm that, it's important to have the local legislation reflect the same way. And the same goes with properly adopting the national decrees, installing the nature parks. And because we're funded through the Blue Marine Group, this is only touching on waterways, but this applies to your land as well. So if there are any green spots left on your island that you wish to protect, it's a nice momentum to designate those green spots and then bring them along, include them in the legislation as well. This is a good moment to do that. Then the second thing that you could work on is management, supervision, and enforcement. If you do designate areas to protect, look through VROMI if your management agreements with this organization, or maybe you want to give it to another organization, that's up to that ministry or department then, to make sure that it's feasible. You can't designate the area, hey, we're not gonna build anything there because that's a hillside, and then not have it enforced or supervised by anything. So that would lead to a renewed management agreement, include enough budget, supervision, enforcement, and a growth plan. So, oh yeah, the last point, what I noticed is that there are a lot of informal agreements with stakeholders. So you ask the park ranger for the Nature Foundation, how do you enforce? Yeah, we call Coast Guard. Yeah, but who then? And based on what? And what does the Coast Guard then have to do? The Coast Guard at the moment is not enforcing a lot anymore. I don't know if the Coast Guard has capacity for this. And when I dig a little bit deeper, I actually see and find out that there are no agreements in place. So the Coast Guard is just doing this because there's been verbal agreements along the years, but it would be good to come to a point where the country, St. Maarten, puts these things in place with a Coast Guard, put these things in place with the prosecutor office, and then just set it up the right way. Yes, so that brings me to the pre-last slide, the summary of steps. What we presented to the Blue Marine Group, it's a little bit hazy with the choice of color, sorry about that. But first, the presentation to the committee, that's this. We're here today. We will complete the legal baseline and submit that to a report. And that report will be shared with stakeholders, with the Blue Marine Group, also with VROMI. Your committee will probably receive a copy of that as well. Then we know what the legal baseline is. Based on that, the Nature Foundation and Parliament will decide which areas do you want to protect. Do you want to keep protecting Little Key, Mullet Point, and Man of War Shoal? Do you want to expand protection areas? It's really important to know what do you want to protect. Then it comes to submitting the legislative package via the Ministry of VROMI, support and advice when going through the Council of Advice, and support and advice when going through the Council of Ministers, Parliament, and the Governor again. So those are the steps that we will be taking in the coming 6 to 9 months. I know you have election process all through all of this. Yeah, but these are legally the steps that we will hope to follow. The timeline, we made this timeline before. Sorry, I'm now realizing. And May 28th, that's the day, the presentation to the committee. Legal baseline we'll have ready by July 1st. The decision on which areas we will get from Leslie July 1st as well. And we discussed with Leslie and the Blue Marine Group that the proposal would be to be flexible in certain areas so you can do enforcement more on this, and that we have to see how that works from a legal perspective. Preparation of the legal products, we start August 1st, and then submission in VROMI September 1st. So from a legal aspect, we'll be done September 1st, but that relies heavily on the input of what Parliament wants. And I think what the presentation will be done in products, the content will come from a nature organization. So from them, they will really do their dream scenario, what they would love to be protected, and that will just be brought forward on the Parliament floor. So that was my part.
Thank you, Mr. De Jong, and to both of you for the extensive presentation on the marine legislation that you're working on. I now look to my left, to the members of Parliament, if I can give anyone the floor. MP Jacobs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues. Good afternoon to the Nature Foundation, represented, of course, by Ms. Leslie Hickerson and, of course, Legal De Jong. Thank you for the presentation. Having heard different presentations from you, I don't know if we got a gist of the impact on us as people. We tend to, leave the protection of our ecosystem up to others, and yes, those are the tree huggers or whatever you want to call them. But of course, we're talking about marine protections as well. But I have seen presentations, and I think even in one of our latest science fairs, where the students were able to clearly show the cycle effect of continuing on this trajectory and the impact it would have on our lives. So, of course, availability, well, we can't do much about climate change, but we could look at more mitigating actions by us as residents, and as well as in terms of awareness of what our actions do to contribute to it. Because the chair going into the sea, tying them down, I guess. But in the sense, once something gets into the water, how we as humans can stop it from hurting our animals. But even the sharks that we're so fearful of, if we completely deplete them, it damages the entire ecosystem, which limits our food. So I think other presentations I've heard internationally really focus on helping the humans to see that it's about them, that their very existence is at threat, and seeing how we can collaborate to make it happen. So the sustainable development part totally has my 100% support. And seeing that we're such a small island nation, and the fact that the coral reef bleaching is already so advanced, I'm looking forward to the legislation and the protection of more sites, because of course it's only when you guys make these presentations we see, yes, we have some protection, but it's really and truly not enough. And I guess collaborating more with our regional partners, because I heard your discussion on limitation of rangers, human resources, finances. Since we are in the kingdom together, isn't it some way that we as kingdom partners can collaborate? Because it wouldn't be as much work everywhere, every time, within the close confines right here within Sabre Station, St. Maarten, especially Anguilla. I know they took part in the fisheries discussion recently held in Friendside. So basically I'm saying 100% in support. I think we actively need to identify it in here exactly what were the bottlenecks in getting the education and TEAT ministry more on board. So those would be, I think, the actions that as a parliament, besides waiting on the legislation, that we could actively seek for further collaboration in the interest of protection, preservation, and mitigating further damage. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Jacobs. I will pass the floor now to MP Roseberg.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I also had a few questions based on what was brought forward. In connection to the enforcement part, and the Coast Guard and our prosecutor office and their involvement, did recently, or if so, when, were there any conversations in regards to that to have something established? And if so, when did that take place and what was the outcome of that, if it can be shared? Also in regards to more collaboration with TEAT ministry and also education, was that already discussed? And if so, when was that? And what was the outcome out of that meeting? So that I also can understand from Parliament side what can take place. And then in connection to the collaboration and the manpower, you mentioned Aruba, you mentioned also Seba, or you mentioned Seba or Stacia. So did that already take place to maybe research collaboration options, and what came out of that discussion? So those are my 3 questions. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. And I now give the floor to MP Westcott Williams. MP Westcott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. And of course, good afternoon to my colleagues. Good afternoon to Ms. Hickerson as well as Mr. De Jong. And thank you for your presentations. You know, I really don't know where to start. And I say this because we know. But being the perpetual optimistic person that I am, I think we should give it a shot again. I mean, I have belabored the issue of the application of the hillside policy until I turned blue in the face. I was the one who, as you would know, proposed a budget amendment to assist Nature Foundation to do a little more than the budget that they had available to them. But somehow I got a feeling that while that was approved and everything, of course, the other issue was the invasive species management program and those kind of things. And but again, we know. We get these type of presentations. We get presentations from acrobatics that basically tells us, in fact, they're a little even more pessimistic than you are about the time that we have to address these many issues. We have the nature management law. We have in which Nature Foundation or an organization such as Nature Foundation should be heard. And the answer to that being, yeah, they can be heard. So then they're heard like after the fact. And what we're seeing now, the pictures that we're seeing, no one really knows how much more to come. GB today, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I started out saying I honestly, really, truly don't know where to start except to say, let's give it a try again. Let's really try to get these matters going. Capacity, human resources, we know it's a problem. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to deal with the ban on plastic bag and plastic straws and styrofoam. We're still trying to figure out how, so legislation, yes, but if we don't have an understanding that the enforcement is also going to be, worked upon, then we're going to have beautiful presentations. We got some policies. We made building code policies that actually needed to be taught how to use. It was so extensive. But even when we do, and people understand it and know, how we have to apply these building codes, and then what? We can't enforce the old building codes right now. How are we going to enforce that kind of updated and modernized building codes? And yeah, I might sound a little like you, but then just let me I don't have any questions. I mean, the obvious is there. And I just hope that we can really sink our teeth in it this time around, and and get some things done, because I share your concern, and I share that we're getting closer and closer to the point of no return. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Westcott. I pass the floor now to MP Ludmila de Wever. MP de Wever, you have the floor.
Griffier knows what to do. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chairlady, for the floor. So I know that we've had this discussion a lot, but I'm going to bring it forward here for public consumption as well, and for those colleagues of mine that are not aware of it. Besides my finance background, I do have a background in boating. I'm a big advocate since I was born, basically. And one of the things that I brought up since the days of me being Minister of TEAT was about matching French side policies. And French side's Réserve Naturelle, they are very much involved in terms of having this enforcement authority, because anyone that goes with a Dutch side registered boat to Tintamar has to pay a per head fee to go into their marine park. That per head fee used to be €3, but now it's up to €5, if I'm not mistaken. And I think what happened, where we need some clarity on it, and I'm sure the president might be tuned in and might correct me later on, but there was a difference between what was charged to Dutch side registered boats as well as French side registered boats. Now, if we're talking about cooperation with our northern side of the island, that's one of the first areas that we should be cooperating in. And also to the sense of where we need to increase the marine park areas or protected areas, I would expect, from my position, that to be matched for any boats entering into that area. Because I heard you earlier talk about a per boat fee. But if we are going to match, then it needs to be a per head fee of who is coming through that area. That would be my recommendation for any changes in your advice that you would be giving to the COM to start this off with. And moving on from there, I did see that you had a map over the areas that require, there were 4 areas you mentioned that would need, the legislation to protect it. And when you talked about the eastern side of the island, it made me think exactly to what the first speaker here mentioned today, that we are indeed, as all of us know, over 85% dependent on tourism. And we tend to think that all the attention is going towards tourism. But if our livelihoods are dependent on it, that's exactly what happens. And then you do feel that sometimes your citizens get neglected, but in the long run, it's actually all connected, because even though we might be focusing on the coastline of the island, it all originates from within the island, within the interior of the island. And it goes back to what our policy is overall, and what our behaviors are in terms of how we treat our sewage, how we treat our offal water. And I can start from the neighborhoods of Dutch Quarter, I can start from the neighborhoods of St. Peter's, and even though people think that, oh, you're not close to the coastline there, the way that water flows is from a higher point to the lower point. The lower point is on the beach side. So no matter what, it's about enforcement of that policy. And I'm saying all this literally so people can understand the connection from interior land going out to the end of it. And when you think about that eastern part that you're talking about, I'm going to be specific about it with Oyster Pond Lagoon, because you continually mention Simpson Bay Lagoon, but I don't know if anyone has taken a drive lately over to Oyster Pond. There is a river, like, that's just there 24/7, and that river is septic, it's sewage. I've tested it before. If anyone wants to test any runoff water, they can get a bottle at the SLS lab and pay for it out of pocket, and you can see what's in it. I've done that, and my fear is that, you know, knowing that this is running on the border, but it started from the Dutch side, that we even run the risk of litigation from the French side, not by the French government, by the French side residents, because we are continuously allowing septic to flow through our land, onto the border, into the lagoon that we share with the French side. And there's no way that I can, you know, sugarcoat that. It has been an issue that I've brought up multiple times. Now, saying all of that, I really would like to know, so when it comes to enforcement, if giving that authority to Nature Foundation will not only look at the coastlines, or like the authority in the sense of getting, you know, you all getting involved in having a little bit more, how do you say, fining ability, that sort of thing. Because if I'm bringing up two things that I need to understand how it will be managed. So being able to charge boats per head going into the area, and whether or not in our capacity issue that we continuously bring up about VROMI, who would be the right authority to look over the way that wastewater is basically ending up in our coastlines. And yeah, because it's been there, it's been happening for a long time. No one's doing anything about it. So I just want to see what your recommendation would be for that, other than it should be the Ministry of VROMI that should be enforcing this, because we have a lot of options here to handle that stuff. I can go on and on just like my neighbor, because it's something that the more you are aware of the tourism connection and what we're doing to our environment, you're constantly going to have a lot of questions about this, and we all have to be on the same page. Otherwise, we're shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to our economic survival that is massively dependent on tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, MP De Wever. MP Westcott, you would like the floor again?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Just briefly, Mr. De Jong, did you, in your research as to the legal basis and the enforcement, the matter of Mullet Pond and that being protected by the Ramsar Convention, any idea or thoughts how that protection can work in the situation that we have right now, where the property is considered, or not considered, it's actually being offered for sale, without the local protection of Mullet Pond? So could you share your thoughts, and maybe if not today here in this meeting, if you can maybe look into that for us with a legal brill up, as they would say. That's yeah. So that's a very specific request I have to you, so that maybe we are still in time to take some mitigating measures where that is concerned. And secondly, I guess the answer is no, but let me ask it still. The French side a couple of weeks ago had an entire a sort of a conference, whatever have you, with respect to fisheries, and you know, do you have any were you at all involved, one, and if so, do you have any information on it? Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. I also could go on and on, especially when it comes to our marine protections and, you know, the volunteer work that I help with Nature Foundation, and also beach cleanups, regular cleanups, etc. I just had two questions. The Coast Guard question was kind of answered already. I was going to ask if they assist, because at the end of the day, of course, legislation is nice, but if there's no enforcement capacity, it doesn't really have an impact. The one question was, is Nature Foundation currently, or going to be, once all of these protections are in place, engaged in restoring what has been taken out, whether it's mangroves, finding ways to have coral reef nurseries that can then restore reef presence and, of course, ecosystems around the island. And to tie in a bit to what MP Jacob said about the impact on humans, I think it goes beyond, you know, just what we see and how we experience the water and the land, but also what we eat. So last month, I know Carmabi, the Caribbean Biological, they basically had an article going around about parrotfish in Curacao, extreme die-off because of the cyanobacteria that they were finding, that they were eating in the algae. Now, it can be present, but that means that the bacteria itself is kind of evolving to cause such a large die-off. And while parrotfish are not advised for human consumption, we all know that restaurants sometimes take liberties, and people themselves will take liberties. They catch a fish, they eat a fish. So has Nature Foundation also advised government on, you know, the fact that this could then start showing up in the things that we consume at our restaurants and such? And have there been any instances of die-off of any fish species, whether algae cleaners or not, in St. Maarten? And that's it for me right now. Do you need some time to to answer the questions? You can go right into it? Okay. Who do I give the floor to? Mr. De Jong? Okay. Sorry? MP Jacobs, you had something to add? Just 1 second. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. In the presentation, it went to me a little bit fast on the mangroves, because I think we've seen after the hurricane that, especially around our ponds, that we can visibly see within this area, Phillipsburg, around the Fresh Pond, etc., that you see a large growth. And then I'm still hearing you saying that there's a die-off of mangroves. So for me, after the hurricane, there's been a resurgence around the ponds especially. And so visibly, if we're looking at that now, specifically those two ponds, is what is there now excessive, not excessive, or is it die-off elsewhere? Because that wasn't very clear to me, and I only just saw it, you know, some of the visuals weren't that clear from here. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, MP Jacobs, and I'll give the floor now to Mr. De Jong.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. I would like to just first go into the pre-last question of Ms. MP Westcott-Williams for what happens with the sale of a protected area. If the legal basis is established properly, so if you have the international protection, if you have the local protection, and if the local protection is done via the correct manner, so there is an LBAY, and then that LBAY has the correct legal basis in a national ordinance, then if there's a sale, the ownership rights are impacted. So yes, ownership properties can be sold and it can be transferred. However, it will be transferred encumbered because you can't develop it because there's an environmental ordinance or a legal basis in place protecting it. So yes, it will impact if the legal basis is correct. If the legal basis is not complete, so if there's only an international protection element to that, but not the local part, then it will be faulty, and then you have discussion. So what the case is now by Mullet Point itself, I'm not sure, and we will specifically look into that then as well, and then you'll get the report. So Leslie's like showing me here that you should give it to the Nature Foundation to reforest, which could be a nice project. But yes, that could be an idea. Then the question of MP De Wever, how would you go about putting in place a per head fee? And the second question, how would you go about wastewater enforcement? So what I've noticed, you can designate when you want collection and when you want to expand your revenues. There's different examples that you can look at in the region already. So for example, the Bonaire model, they recently, I think a year ago, had decided to go from a $20 per head fee to a $75 per head fee upon entry. The SEBA model is very similar to MP De Wever's question. SEBA uses every user of the marine park goes to pay, I believe, a $10 entry fee or a $5 entry fee. So those are per head fees. The moment to regulate that is with this legislative package, because it'll just encompass everything. And if you wish to have a per head fee, the nature park needs to be established, so there needs to be a legal basis for that. And if you want to have an entrance fee for that, include that in the legislation, mandate the nature organization to collect that on your behalf and show it on their books, and then you're done. So yes, you can provide that in a legal basis as well. Then to your second question regarding wastewater and enforcement of that, I find it interesting that you're looking at a nature organization to enforce that. I can imagine where you're coming from. Why? Because in my experience, those just fall under the sanitation department or on the Department of Hygiene. So for example, in St. Eustatius, on Ceiba, in Bonaire, you have a hygiene department, and then the hygiene department has enforcers, and they see if there's wastewater that's not allowed. You're not allowed to have wastewater on the street or runoff from your septic, because when it's septic, it's a danger to your public health. It can cause a lot of disease. So that's from your, I believe you have a VSA ministry here, or it goes with a combination of justice and VSA. So I would not look, or I would not outsource that enforcement. I would see how can you strengthen your local department's enforcement and just confirm that the legal basis is there. So I'm not sure if you have a wastewater ordinance here. That would have to be checked. But that falls under that. I would not appoint that to a nature organization. Then MP Westcott Williams had requested how would you go about that then with the plastic ban, and how do you go with enforcement? In my experience, when we introduced the plastic ban in Bonaire, it had been done and it had been established through a whole legislative process of inclusion. So the stakeholder sessions were done like a year in advance. It was consulted with the public. The supermarkets were having tabletop sessions. So we just had conversations with the supermarkets. We had conversations with the Carnival Foundation. We had conversations with everyone in advance, and then you do arrangements and agreements with them so that your enforcement eventually just goes smoother. And what we notice now is in a year, so in the beginning, everyone loves it. They uphold the plastic ban. But then in a year, they start to slide off. Why? Because the beer is dissolving the plastic cup, and the plastic cup, it's not nice to drink your beer from the plastic cup during Carnival. So then, paper cup, and then there's your first Carnival that starts to slide, and then, they want to shift. So then it's up to your enforcement department and up to your ministry then to keep going at that. What the plastic ban process here now in the country is, I'm not aware. And then the question of MP Roseberg regarding Coast Guard. From what I understand, the research that showed so far is that operationally, the Coast Guard works very well together with the park rangers and with the nature organization. They do trainings together, and that all works, but it doesn't translate yet to written agreements together, to enforcement arrangements together, and that's the next step. So when it comes to, all right, what is the park ranger going to enforce? What is the Coast Guard going to enforce? What would you like them to do together? Those all should be in just collaboration agreements, and they don't have them yet. Not in writing. Those are the questions I had.
Thank you, Mr. De Jong. I will let Ms. Hickerson answer first, MP Westcott, and then is that okay? All right. Ms. Hickerson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I do have quite a bit to go through here. I think I'll go through via person. For MP Gums, you asked about restoration projects on St. Martin. And one of the things that we're really looking into that our sister islands in the Dutch Caribbean have moved towards is nature-based solutions, which I think is the area that St. Martin needs to look at this. In the past, the Nature Foundation, we would implement kind of Band-Aid style solutions, a 6-month project here, a 9-month project there, and then something like Hurricane Irma would come through and wipe the whole thing off the face of the island. So looking at nature-based solutions, for example, something like we have regular flooding happening in the area of Kupakoi and Mullet Pond, and it's making it very difficult for people that live in that area to take their kids to school properly, to get to work when there's bad weather. Looking at nature-based solutions like sediment traps, mangrove restoration in that area, looking at the planning for that area and making sure that we are accommodating the changes that climate change is bringing onto us is the area that we need to start. We are hesitating to initiate small-scale restoration projects at this time because the Nature Foundation has a severe capacity issue. I think I could come up with 4 people right now that desperately want to start a coral restoration project. They want to put their own time, their own money into it. They want it to be happening. But right now, I don't even have a marine park ranger. We are just not at the capacity to be able to execute these things. And without a change in our funding and capacity, we have to keep looking for projects to support this. So right now I have all 4 people that are project-based, and their salary is dependent on government contracts and international projects that need things signed by a certain date and a certain time. They're all always looking for the next round of funding and what we can do for it. It would be very nice if we could initiate a sustainable financing mechanism like for coral restoration, where we could bring tourists to go see a coral restoration area, and the cost of that would go towards supporting that area. And there are a few businesses that would be able to support us in that, but we need the initiative coming from our government contract. Additionally, on the consumption of parrotfish and the die-off that's been happening in Curacao, we have not yet had signs of that this far up north, which is very lucky for us. We have, of course, other fish that we strongly do not recommend anyone in St. Martin consumes, for example, barracuda, because of the impact of Ciguatera, and sharks, which have such a high mercury rate, but can often be found sold either on the French or Dutch side. Shark meat. So there are things that the Nature Foundation regularly stands against for the health of our citizens, and the impact of having a less than healthy marine ecosystem, is a very nice way to put it, is that there will be more and more fish that are impacted by this. Locally, our largest impacts from this have been the stony coral tissue loss disease, which decimated stony coral in St. Martin from about 2017, 2018 until a couple of years ago. Not because we've recovered from the disease, but because all of the corals that were susceptible to it have died off. The diadema die-off has been really detrimental in the SSS Island area. And of course, in our pond areas and sometimes the lagoon, we have die-offs of the tilapia fish that can be found there. That happens normally because of the oxygen level of the ponds. It's all connected to the heat, right? Climate change is making the water hotter. It's making the plants bloom. The plants take the oxygen out of the water, and the fish die off. And we've seen Romy with the backhoe scraping, like pulling out hundreds and hundreds of fish. And that will continue to happen as the climate change impacts get more and more severe. Okay, for MP Jacobs, one of the things I wanted to mention is that for that Project Carina, which I think you'll find really interesting, is if we can get the contracts awarded, which I think right now are awaiting approval at the Council of Ministers, for our consultants to start work, we are going to do a very large-scale socioeconomic study, risk and vulnerability assessment, so that the human impact of where our nature is will be completed in that project report. I do ask the members of Parliament to help us. Those contracts have been awaiting award, I think since December. So that's something that does need to go through so that we can have the time proper for those consultants to do their research, and we can have a full study on that. And I'm happy to go through more information about that later on if needed. Also for the mangroves for MP Jacobs. The mangroves that are surrounding the salt pond and fresh pond here are white mangrove species. And white mangrove species are very sturdy species that can grow quite well and rebound very quickly. They are very essential to the bird life that's in the area here. They play a really large role for nesting habitats for the birds. Some of you have gotten to go to our launch of the new birding platform in Great Salt Pond. There is actually, this area is considered an important birding area, and so that's the major role that those mangroves play here, as well as keeping the pollution from the roadway from entering the waterways, which of course are regularly opened to Great Bay. If you look through the root system there, you can see the amount of garbage that those mangroves are really holding back from the ocean, and they play a very, very important role for that as well. The mangroves that I suggest be protected, however, are the red and black mangrove species. They're both extremely difficult to find, we'll say, in the wild in St. Maarten because they mostly rimmed the lagoon area, with now the marinas, the condos, the restaurants right on the lagoon. That's where we lost most of those two mangrove species to. At Little Key, pending the approval of its protection, EPIC initiated a very nice restoration program for the red mangrove species there, and it is where we can find the most growing red mangroves right now. It's almost that we've run out of space to continue to the restoration there. Black mangroves are extremely difficult to find in St. Maarten. The red mangrove area that's nearby the Causeway Bridge is actually anecdotally thought to be a nursery area for eagle rays. And the Reserve Naturel reports several sightings of lemon sharks in their mangroves on the northern side of the lagoon. And we have not been able to tag or report any on our side. I'm looking for a very large project on Elasmo branch, so shark and ray studying to try to prove that they're in the area. But the mangroves that are nearby the Causeway Bridge are under direct pressure to be developed. In fact, when we asked if we could plant mangroves there as part of a restoration, we were told, no, that whole area is going to be developed anyway, so there's no point in doing a restoration. So that's really something to keep in mind. I would love to include that area for protection, or at least the species. For MP Rosenberg, on the education project update, we did a gap, for those of you that don't know, we did a gap analysis regarding nature education in 2022. And we're able to come together with educators, students, and parents on the island to identify the top needs of those educators. In the past, the Nature Foundation, when we thought we were being helpful, we were actually giving educators more work, which is just something the St. Maarten educators cannot have happen anymore. We can't just show up with a poster about corals and ask them to integrate it into their curriculum. They have testing requirements they need to meet. Their curriculum doesn't naturally cover corals. They have to spend days making sure that it fits into their system. So what we proposed is that Nature Foundation staff allocated by an expansion to our service level agreement would spend time in the classroom each week with all 25 schools, and they would spend time helping to integrate local flora and fauna into the required and testable curriculums. You probably know there's several different curriculums that schools follow here in St. Maarten. We have Dutch curriculums, American curriculums, Canadian curriculums, and a Caribbean curriculum. But in most of them, things like coral reefs, mangroves, sharks, they're not covered. So we need to go to the school already and say, you're testable on food web right now. What can we cover on the food web here? We can talk about sharks on the food web. It will still meet your testing requirements, and it's actually aiding the teachers and connecting the youth to their island. One of the most devastating things that we found through those stakeholder engagement surveys is that a lot of our students will, when we interview them, will say, oh, I'm Jamaican, or I'm Dominican, or I'm Saban, and we say, okay, well, how long have you lived in St. Maarten? And they say, no, I was born here, but my parents are Jamaican, because the loss of national identity is rampant through young St. Maarteners. And that is definitely connected to the loss of nature area that they're allowed to enjoy, but also to the nature and the resources of St. Maarten not being introduced to them as valuable assets as students. So that's the idea of the collaboration with the Ministry of Education. I met before elections happened back in 2023 in the late summer, early fall, and gave a presentation to the policy department and then the then Minister of Education, Minister Samuel. And when we discussed it, one of the things that came up is that they really wanted to make sure that the educators actually wanted what we're offering, because allocating funding away from schools and to the Nature Foundation is impactful, and we need to do that mindfully. So they asked that I get letters of support from the school boards. And we received letters of support from 6 school boards and presented that as something to show that the school boards are behind this, the educators are behind this, and they want the collaboration. Recently, I have met with the policy department, but at that time there was not a sitting minister, and they told me, you need to wait. Once we have everything finalized, we will come through, and then you can meet again and present to the new person in office. So I'm not sure what that will look like. Perhaps we'll be presenting to somebody that doesn't know the full process that we've been through, but at least we have on record the support from the school boards. The other aspect that I was going to cover for MP Rosenberg is the regional collaboration. We are very lucky to be connected through the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance throughout all 6 islands in the Dutch Caribbean, and the Nature Foundation has received a lot of benefit through that. Not only do we receive a trust fund payout every year, which greatly supports our capacity. At this point right now, it's actually paying our utility bills and our internet bills, the rental of the warehouse. It's essential to what we're doing, but also it increases our capacity. So we have ranger exchanges so that our rangers can learn more from rangers that have kind of an increased enforcement ability on different islands. We are able to apply for large projects. Actually, through the DCNA, we had the Endoplastic project, which supported 2 full-time staff for almost 3 years at the Nature Foundation office, which was a huge impact for us as well. All of those cleanups that several of you have been to, that was funded through that program. But what we need really, and what new projects are unwilling to do, is core staff, support for core staff. If I apply for funding for shark research and I say, can you please pay for a second marine park ranger, the funders often say, no, that's a country issue, it's not a project issue. And when our project ends, what will you do? You'll just lose the capacity. So that's something that has been a consistent issue for us. But through things like if we are able to join Urari Marine Mammal Sanctuary, there may be an opportunity for increased capacity there. Right now, the Bess Islands, Bonaire, Statia, and Saba are all part of the Urari Sanctuary, but St. Maarten is not. Okay, for MP De Wever, I have just some discussion things on the northern side cooperations. Actually, with both the Reserve Naturelle and the Prefecture, we have really been able to expand our cooperations, particularly through invasive species management. Early on through the invasive species project, which was initiated thanks to MP Westcott Williams and the focus that was given there, we have connected with both parties, the Reserve Naturelle and the Prefecture. Because of the different setup of the north versus south side of the island, some of our tasks align with the reserve and some align with the prefecture. We have really been able to expand our cooperation, and actually now for the first time since I've been involved with the Nature Foundation, we have almost daily communication with the Reserve Naturelle. So the opportunity for expanse in collaboration is definitely there. For the wastewater enforcement, Mr. de Jong spoke about this already, but that is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and the capacity issue has to be there. It's kind of the same difficult decision that's going to come from our solid waste pollution, right? Solid waste pollution and the dump here in town are always going to be an issue unless we discuss where the funds that are supposed to be managing those systems come from. We all understand why decisions were made in the past to entice cruise ships and airlines to come to St. Maarten, mega yachts as well, but at a certain point, St. Maarten has to function as well. And every other island, you have people that pay for their garbage to be collected. There just has to be some give somewhere, whether it's the enforcement of tax collection, whether it is a change in where the funding is coming from, that has to be addressed. Wastewater is one of the biggest challenges we have with coral health in St. Martin. I think that's all, yes. For MP Westcott, for the fisheries update on the French side, we were actually asked to present at that fisheries conference. It was a really nice collaboration, like we said, between the north and south side of the island and with Anguilla. One of the key things that came out of that conference is that a lot of fishermen, both on the French side of St. Martin and the Dutch side, are struggling because they do not currently meet the EU requirements to sell their fish on the French side of the island. That's making it difficult for the Dutch side fishermen to compete with French side fishermen because everyone is coming over to our side. That's something that we're really hoping to address with funding that we're applying for with Best Life, where we have allocated funds to try to support fishermen to either meet the requirements that the EU is asking of them so that they can sell on the French side of the island, or if that's impossible to do, to support supplemental income that is still based from the sea. It is a very difficult topic to address because EU regulations are EU regulations. It's not like something that the French side can just decide they're not going to abide by any further. And what the local fishermen are being asked to do is just not realistic. So that was a really nice outcome, to be able to have an open discussion about that and get everybody in the same room so that fishermen could air the issues that they've been having. Also from you, Ms. Westcott-Williams, the Mullet Pond area, of course, like Gerald said, I think a really nice idea would be to reforest that zone. It would really impact the flooding that you have in Kupakoi. Again, probably not a very popular decision for everyone, but it's definitely a very ecological valued area. You have the mangroves and the protected Ramsar site on one side, and then you have a sea turtle nesting beach on the other, which has actually been visited by leatherback sea turtles already this season. So the area in between, if it's going to experience extreme development, is going to impact both of those areas. The leatherback sea turtles only come to the island every couple of years, and their areas for nesting availability are very limited. That's because of our beachside development, right? We could instate things like sea turtle friendly lighting, restrictions on building during nesting times, and higher protections for the nesting areas. But it would take a lot of impact on current legislation to make that happen. If that entire area becomes developed with more condos or more private residences that are of a cost level that is not accessible to the average St. Martiner, there does need to be an exchange made for the loss of nature, because it will definitely impact both. And again, you're definitely going to impact the flooding as well. The more grass and greenery and shrubs and bushes you take away, the harder it is going to be for people to get from Kupakoi back into Simpson Bay. I think that I answered all now.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson, for the answers to the questions. MP Westcott has been waiting some time, so MP Westcott, I now pass you the floor.
Yeah, thank you once again, Madam Chair Lady, and thank you for the responses. And so I would like to know, I saw, of course, Leslie, what you indicated that you would like to be done now, and Parliament's involvement, you know, and you list, I think, like 3 steps in your presentation. And then I saw Mr. De Jong refer to some legislation, so very specifically now, in addition to the support, that's clear, you want Parliament to support some of these things that you mentioned, all of the things that you mentioned. But so is a package of legislation being worked on, is my question, that will then, based on all that has been presented, come to Parliament. So I'm just confirming that that is what's going to happen next. And that has to do with, I guess, the contracts that need to be signed, though they involve the drafting of legislation as well?
Yeah.
Okay, just quickly, and then I have one more small remark.
Yes, Mr. Dion.
Just real quickly, yes, so part of the Blue Marine project is the legislation package as a whole.
Okay.
So the steps that I just presented on what is the timeline, that involves the national ordinance changes and that involves the national decrees. So that's
Okay,
scheduled to be presented in September.
okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, and then could you explain a little more the status of the Little Key Nature Park? Because late last year sometime we received an update that said approval Little Key Nature Park. So, but then I heard you say something about looking at the decree, or yeah, you explain, please.
So the little key is that the draft was presented by VROMI Ministry. The draft, I believe, went through COM already and was presented to the Council of Advice for their advice. And it did not, they came back with a lot of feedback and advice. And that advice has not been translated in the latest draft yet.
Okay.
Once that is done, it will come forward again, and then it's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. I now give the floor to MP Roseberg. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Thank you for your answers as well. I had one clarification answer in regards to one of the questions that I did ask. You answered in regards to education, where that collaboration is at the moment, and but in connection to TIAT, I didn't hear that part as yet. I know there were a lot of questions, so if you can elaborate on that a bit in connection to the agriculture part. And then also, you also mentioned that I missed the part, what is exactly at the Council of Ministers at this moment, because I'm also pro this project, but I would like to know where I can assist and for us to act instead of wait and talk. So, yes, if you can clarify that for me, please. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. Ms. Hickerson.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. Sorry. Yes, for the Ministry of TIAT, some of the collaborations that I think we could expand on, for example, include not only agriculture and maritime affairs, but also the import of animals. We have quite a good relationship with the policy team that deals with that, and we've been able to instate new regulations for the import of birds, for example, and we often get asked for advice regarding an import of a new species or for the introduction of species into a certain area. And that relationship is going quite well. The collaboration is there, but there's actually not funding to support it. So that's something that we're doing because the ministry's reaching out to us because they want the advice and they want to do things properly. And therefore, we're submitting everything and we're keeping everything up to date. It is quite time consuming for myself or my science officer. We normally handle those requests, but there's not actually a funding allocated to it. So the expansion of our service level agreement with the Ministry of TIAT could, for example, look like instituting another marine park ranger, because under maritime affairs, dealing with the management of Man O' War Shoal was actually originally decreed by a Minister of TIAT. And so the management there could expand. In particular, if we expand to other areas, we will need capacity there. So like I said, the Ministry of VROMI currently contributes 204,000 guilders each year to the 3 core staff, and that is completely maxed out on the staff that we have. Adding another research officer and another marine park ranger, and then to be totally transparent, making sure that we're paying the staff enough that they stay, and that we can recruit staff that are qualified for what I'm asking of them, would make an incredible difference to our capacity to manage those areas. And for the contracts that are at the Council of Ministers, that is with Project Carina. So Project Karina had the Nature Foundation side, but Rezimbit projects always have a government-based side as well. And so the policy department with the Ministry of VROMI went through a full procurement process to hire the consultants for those additional studies that are more socio-based than nature-based. So we wouldn't be the most qualified people to execute those studies. The procurement process was very in-depth. It had a blind evaluation, and the candidate was chosen quite close to election time. So I believe that the procurement was approved and awarded by the then minister, but now it needs to be evaluated by a new council of ministers. We haven't been able to get feedback on it. I actually have a meeting this week scheduled with Angelique Gums to see the exact update. But from what we've been told, it's gone through and it's waiting for approval. So those researchers have not started their project yet, which is quite a delay.
Mr. de Jong, you had something to add?
Oh, just one thing to add to what Ms. Hickerson said and to, I believe, the question of MP Roseberg. There's an interesting thing that I've noticed from Sint Maarten, Ceba, and Statia when it comes to your agriculture and when it comes to export of your agriculture. So I've noticed that farmers here on Ceba and on Statia have operational difficulties and legal hurdles in exporting their products to non-Dutch Caribbean islands. And strangely enough, when you've very clear, like operational examples, when you want to export a goat from here to a British island or to St. Kitts or to a French island, there are a lot of operational bottlenecks. So it's difficult for farmers to expand their export product, which can actually get them a heightened income. They can improve their business model. And that's actually something that you can help with. I understand that there's soon to be an IPCO delegation going to the Netherlands. And there's a fairly easy process where Sint Maarten, Ceba, and Statia can be put on a European Union list, approved, pre-approved for export, meaning that for certain designated animal products, such as fish or meats, you can be included in a European Union export-approved list, meaning that you can, or your country can export products to neighboring islands. The fact that Sint Maarten, Dutch side Sint Maarten, cannot export to St. Kitts or to Guadeloupe or to Martinique is really beyond me. So that is maybe something that you as parliamentarians can help with in lobbying to the kingdom to just put Sint Maarten on that list.
Thank you, Mr. de Jong. I see MP La Cruz would like the floor. MP La Cruz.
A blessed afternoon to one and all. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon, Mr. de Jong and Ms. Hickerson. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question. The project of the invasive animals, how far is that project? And is there a report that we could actually get and see what was the result? I know that there were some challenges with the way we thought of getting rid of the animals. Thank you.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. Ms. Hickerson, you want to just answer that quickly? Okay.
Yes, thank you for the question. For the invasive species project, that is still ongoing. It is aligned with our current service level agreement, so the Ministry of VROMI will continue to contribute to that for us to maintain the work that we're doing. One of the large outcomes that we've had in 2023 is the purchase of a thermal drone so that we could actually do a much more specific population count that wasn't available to us. And the use of that thermal drone showed that the issue was greater than we had originally defined. And of course, at the initial start of the project, we were not yet collaborating as well with the French side of St. Maarten. Now that has changed, and they will be using our thermal drone, and we will be assisting with methods to make sure that we have an island-wide population count of the specific green monkey species. Additionally, with the Ministry of ROMI, we have discussed the impacts of other invasive species like the green iguana, which is currently a huge risk for our neighboring islands of Saba and Statia, as they still have their endemic iguanas that have not yet been extradited by our green iguana like ours, where we used to have the lesser Antillean iguana. And other invasive species that come via shipments. So we have discussed expanding the invasive species project so that it is not so narrowly focused on one specific species, but that we can focus area-based. For example, eradicating invasive species in the area of Little Bay where the brown pelicans nest and rats can impact their nesting habitats, or on Naked Boy Hill where bird nests are being impacted by mongoose and green monkeys, or in the shipping areas to ensure that we're not putting neighboring islands at risk with our invasive species being introduced into their more protected nature areas. We were able to trap and euthanize several of the green monkey species in 2023, though right now we're actually in the process of recruiting a new staff member for that project so that we can expand, as discussed, to area-based management rather than so focused on one individual species. A large-scale invasive species management project cooperating with the prefecture with a significant increase in funding would be the best possible way forward. $50,000 US per year is simply an entry-level invasive species management project, and therefore we will continue to manage in areas, an area-specific, which will be much more achievable than island-wide.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. MP De Wever, you asked for the floor. You have the floor.
I did. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all again for all the answers so far. You know, still trying to make a connection with, well, I'm glad then that you all pointed out the connection between the various ministries in order to kind of see this push forward. So thanks again for mentioning that and reminding all of us about all the work that's still left to do with it. But in the stating of that, I'm thinking again of revenue, how to help you out, in addition to what you're saying about the Ministry of ROMI being the one to subsidize you, in essence. But I remember that all the yachts that come in get charged a nature fee. So I know that this is showing up on the Slack invoices, but again, this is all St. Maarten business, right? So are you actually getting that nature fee? Do you have any dialogue going on with the Harbor Group of companies or Slack particularly? But it's not, I'm not asking you that because it says nature fee, so it should go to Nature Foundation. That is not it, but I feel like based on all the work that you all have done, whether or not that dialogue is happening. Because when you review the services provided by Slack, some of it leave a lot to be desired in terms of what they should be doing for an industry that's very, very important to us, specifically with those coming in and out of the lagoon. And most of the time, you know, choosing not to actually stay in Dutch waters, go to French waters because of those services or fees. So that's it. It's not about putting anyone on the spot. It's about the truth and us knowing exactly, all of us knowing where we go with that and how we can assist again later on. Thank you.
Thank you, MP De Wever. Ms. Hickerson?
Thank you, MP De Wever, for the question. No, actually, at this time, the Nature Foundation does not receive funds collected from the yachts under the nature fee status. I believe that goes towards the Lagoon Authority and maintenance that they do there, though we do not have a collaborative or agreement or verbal or otherwise. What we do have is on an ad hoc basis, the port will reach out to us or we will reach out to the port, in particular about large vessels anchored in areas that we think are areas of concern, or that fishermen call us and say are areas of concern, which is what's happened most recently. A fisherman reached out to us and said the ship is too close. So we investigated and reached out to the port and were able to set up a new anchoring zone for that vessel, but that it's very ad hoc. There is no formal collaboration. One of the things that I mentioned in management needs is a formal nature fee. I was speaking most recently with the Stenapa Park of Bonaire on their nature fee and the capacity and the stability that they've been able to receive from that. I think that introducing a nature fee that goes towards the conservation and management of nature would alleviate the stress that we're putting on individual ministries to support all of these needs when we have such issues with tax compliance and resource fees. And there are ways to do this that it has been proven time and time again that tourists do not mind paying a nature fee, that this is something that they are coming here to enjoy the value, they see the value in it. And also, we do recognize that our Dutch Caribbean islands and the residents thereof should be able to travel within the islands as financially easily as possible. And so that's something that can have limits to it. I know in Bonaire they have a smaller amount that you pay if you come in and you're a Dutch Caribbean island resident. For us, it would be such a new and entry-level thing that would make such an impact so quickly due to our number of tourists that we could leave that open. For example, I'm thinking of our partners in Saba and Statia on this. If a Saban needs to come over here to get a certain type of medicine for the day and they fly over in the morning, ferry back at night, or they're coming over for a certain type of food that is for like a child's allergy or something, I don't think they should be paying a nature fee to come onto the island. So there does need to be exceptions for that, exceptions for transit guests. But the amount of tourists that St. Maarten receives, even a very small nature fee, would be much more than what our current government subsidy offers.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. MP Brug would also like the floor. MP, you have the floor.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the presentation and also for being here today. Good afternoon as well to ladies and gentlemen, everyone listening aboard, listening to the presentation today as well. My question, earlier you mentioned about the salt pond, that you have a bird site area. Is there anything, does the Nature Foundation has any plans or any ideas on how we can bring back the salt pond or have something more more presentable, especially considering it's in the center of town? And in addition to that, also with regard to the legal services that Mr. De Jong is offering, is it coming from your budget or is it government also taking the tab for that one?
Thank you, MP Brooke. For the Great Salt Pond, the cultural and heritage aspect of the salt pond and the state that it's currently in are huge areas of concern for the Nature Foundation. And we have tried to find aspects to do like a feasibility study for restoring the area, because it is a significant loss, not only to the natural environment, but again, the culture and the heritage of the island. One of the things that I think needs to be addressed immediately is the dump that is on the pond and the ways that the dump is being used, in particular for wastewater, if the wastewater plant is not working, and for the dumping of dead animals. Those things really need to be addressed. I am not sure where the current waste management solution project is. It's a very large project, and I'm not sure. I've gone to several stakeholder meetings about it, and we've given advice. But I think that needs to be, our waste management system needs to be addressed, and we will continue to hope for a feasibility study to do so. Oh, yes. And then for De Jong Legal, that is all provided by the funding from Blue Marine Foundation right now. And he has worked with us quite nicely on the costs that are incurred for the work that we have asked of him, so that it's manageable within that project budget. But that does mean that because it's coming from Blue Marine, there could be terrestrial gaps because it is a marine-focused project.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. MP Brug, you had one more thing you wanted to add?
Just for clarification, you said that you presented, you said that you had communication, but with regard to the waste management and the projects, with regard to the lagoon, have you been in communication with the NRPB for example? Have they involved you, considering after Irma they have been involved in the dump project? And also with regard to the salt pond again. So what type of recommendations have you brought forward, and to whom?
Ms. Hickerson?
Yes, the NRPB has brought us in for stakeholder engagements and interviews, and we have worked with their different teams on several different things, actually, the waste management system being one of them. Though it's such a long and in-depth project, I'm just not sure of its current status. For the salt pond, I haven't brought forth any recommendations as of yet because we would like to do a little bit more research on what would actually work. It's another one of those things where I could come with a couple of Band-Aid solutions or some ideas, but really what would be the best case scenario is if we had a 6-month feasibility study to see where the biggest issues are coming from, because it's anecdotal that I think the biggest issues are coming from the dump. It's just, to me, seems like something that makes sense, but it could be that there is a lot of wastewater runoff from the businesses and homes in the area that even if we solve the dump issue, that that wastewater is so high that Great Salt Pond would still be in the state that it's in. So we really need to do some like in-depth focused research on what it would take to get the salt pond back to its current status. But we have had people approach us about that in the past. I wish I could say it would be an easy solution and we just throw some more mangroves out there and it would be totally set. But there's a huge amount of invasive species in the pond now. I don't know how they are impacted by the wastewater that's in the area, the physical pollution, especially around large events that happen in Phillipsburg. It would be a large undertaking, but it's definitely one that's on our aims and our goals that can be done, and that we are at least involved with, if not spearheading. The Great Salt Pond is of significant importance to us as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. I think I just had one final question, sort of just to, because, you know, as you talk about like nature fee, et cetera, you also want it to be enough. So what ballpark figure to comply with your current SLA, any additional activities in a future SLA, et cetera, what would be for your operational expenses, a ballpark figure that Nature Foundation would need?
Our friends in Bonaire, their fee is currently $40 for their nature fee for each incoming guest. An initial figure for us that would really outshine what we have been able to produce with proposals and everything so far could be something as small as $10 per person. That, with the amount of tourists that we have coming into the island, that would increase our capacity just incredibly. If then we could still manage certain areas, or in the past we've put forward a water sports tax, right? Because those that are enjoying the water are often the ones that contribute the most to its pollution, with things like sunscreens that are not coral friendly or reef friendly, or by taking plastic cups out onto the snorkeling boat with them and letting their hats fly off and different things. So a combination of those, I think, would be a really nice way to start. And then we'll come back in a few years and I'm sure change it then. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. I see no any other need for further deliberation on this particular agenda point, members of Parliament. So if that remains the case, I would like to thank the representatives of the Nature Foundation St. Maarten, Ms. Hickerson and Mr. Simmons de Jong for your presence here today and for providing the necessary information. Thank you to the members of the committee for the very extensive debate and discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this meeting, so I thank you all for your participation and I hereby close this meeting.